Alien lifeforms are surprisingly abundant in Starfield. But unfortunately, no matter how hard you might try, none of these aliens are ever going to talk to you or any other player. You could spend hours attempting to read a terramorph poetry or discuss politics with the Ashtar, but at best they'll ignore you, and at worst they will eat you alive. For all intents and purposes then, there are 0 intelligent sentient alien species in Starfield's huge galaxy. Or at the very least, there are none that we are able to encounter in-game, because vague hints surrounding the story's central mystery do leave the door open to some interesting possibilities. Either way though, the core Starfield experience is clearly built specifically around humanity's journey through the stars, and places very little emphasis on alien life. As someone who likes wacky looking humanoid aliens a lot, that's a bit of a shame. But nevertheless, I greatly respect Bethesda's decision to make this a human-centric universe, because it ultimately gives Starfield a very unique tone which largely feels grounded in the rich history of space exploration rather than speculative visions of the future. I genuinely think that the game is at its best when it focuses on the intergalactic human experience while alluding to the late 60s era of optimistic space exploration. But it's almost like they simply couldn't resist having extraterrestrial elements in the game, because on top of its semi-realistic depiction of the future, there is also the great cosmic mystery of the main story and a huge variety of alien life scattered across the galaxy. And those inclusions do create some weird problems for the game. So what role do aliens actually play in Starfield? What does the lack of talkative extraterrestrials really mean within the story? And are the game's space invaders exclusively cannon fodder, or is there an all-powerful alien race hiding in the shadows?
That looks like a damn good piece of meat. If Harb can't make magic out of that, he's got no business carrying a wand.
Across 100 or so different planets, there are apparently roughly 200 different alien creatures in Starfield. And they vary wildly from weird-looking giraffe-type things to weird-looking worm-type things. Some of these organisms are hostile by default, and some of them were quite happy grazing peacefully in a space meadow before you turned up with your laser gun to hunt them to extinction. I hope that all of that XP you earned was worth it. Amongst the assortment of weird-looking animals in Starfield, there are obviously a few that stand out as critical to the game's world building. The Ashtar are an ever-present threat on Aquila, and their presence is effectively baked into the culture and conversations inside the walls of Aquila City. The Terramorph is a truly terrifying entity and a galaxy-wide threat that is at the heart of the Vanguard questline. And Groats are known as the lovable monsters given to children on Varunkai to raise and eventually turn their skulls into daggers for some reason. Aside from those few creatures though, most of Starfield's aliens are little known and rarely discussed by the people of the settled systems. In fact, those players who are focused chiefly on the main story and the faction questlines can probably go an entire playthrough without encountering more than a handful of different alien species, as the majority of the enemies you face will be fellow humans. It's fair to say then that the great number of other aliens in the game exist primarily to fulfill a purpose other than adding conflict to the game's stories. In essence, it feels like they're all there just to make exploring Starfield's galaxy a little bit more interesting. If you enjoy exploring new environments and cataloguing flora and fauna, the variety of handcrafted creatures are one of the most dynamic and interesting elements you can encounter on any given planet in the game. Based purely on my personal experience, there do seem to be a lot of very similar looking aliens, along with a few who appear exactly alike and presumably ended up simultaneously thriving at opposite ends of the galaxy by sneaking aboard an explorer's ship and hiding in a cargo compartment. Ignoring these eerily similar organisms, though, there are still plenty of interesting creatures to discover. In fact, there might well be too many. Or at the very least, there are a few too many planets where life is present. For the sake of the exploration gameplay loop, it makes sense to ensure that weird extraterrestrial entities are plentiful, but it does seem unlikely that you would find life on roughly 10% of the planets in the known galaxy. Personally then, I choose to believe that somewhere out in the cosmos there's a ship full of rogue zoologists, crossbreeding species and delivering alien creatures to planets across the universe in an effort to give future explorers something to scan or drive into with their rover. Either way, it's pretty clear that Starfield's suite of aliens isn't going to satisfy players looking to discuss the meaning of life with little green men. They will give you something to study or shoot at, but that's about it. Maybe the more interesting aspect of their very existence then is not the specific role they serve within gameplay, but rather what they represent within the context of Starfield's story.
That's mine, give it back!
Bleh.
Because Starfield's aliens are mostly limited to planets where the player is unlikely to spend a lot of time, very few of them were ever going to be especially memorable or interesting. But the mere fact that there are so many different aliens in the game without any of them being intelligent life is pretty interesting to me. What does it suggest about the universe and the role of humanity within that universe that life has spawned on 100 different planets in Starfield's galaxy, many light years apart, and yet only one of those planets has managed to build spacecraft or design a perfect cube-shaped food delivery system? The fact that Starfield doesn't feature any intelligent alien life was clearly the result of a broader creative vision from within Bethesda, which could have been rooted in any number of different ideas. I don't think there's any reason that adding a variety of humanoid aliens to the game would have dramatically increased their workload, so they could have done so if they had really wanted to. Having no intelligent aliens was a very conscious creative choice, whether we like it or not. It's possible they were simply aiming to separate themselves from franchises like Mass Effect and Star Trek, as not having humanoid aliens is one very obvious way to do just that. Or it could be that a focus on their NASA punk aesthetic and realistic predictions about the future necessarily dictated that verbose aliens not be allowed to make an appearance. As far as I'm concerned, though, when you make 100 planets full of life and make all of that life so brainless, it seems pretty clear that you're trying to say something about humanity itself being a very, very special little species. The fact that Starfield's alien life forms haven't developed greater intelligence is not in and of itself totally weird. After all, here on planet Earth, only 2 different organisms have really developed into intelligent life forms. These being humans and dolphins, of course. Though it could be argued that there isn't a great deal of intelligence exhibited by humans when compared with the vastly superior dolphins. No matter how you choose to explain the development of higher thought in organisms, it's clear that on a world full of life like Earth, it is a rarity, and so too should it be across the galaxy. The problem with Starfield's lower life forms then really emerges from a subtle, pervasive feeling that it is statistically improbable for humans to be the only sentient, intelligent beings in a galaxy full of so many other kinds of life. With each new inhabited planet that the player visits, it becomes increasingly hard to believe that none of these creatures are anything more than additional target practice or sources of genetic material for mad scientist experiments. All that said, though, I don't think that such a growing disbelief suggests an inherent failing in the game's world building, but rather it successfully imparts how rare and incredible humanity itself is in this vast galaxy. It is a lonely voyage exploring 100 planets only to learn that there's no other intelligent species out there. But it does also effectively recenter the story's biggest questions squarely on the human experience. I have to wonder whether Starfield's world could have worked without any aliens at all, since it does seem like they exist in the game chiefly to solve problems with the exploration gameplay loop. It certainly would have made things a lot more bleak if there was no other life to be found at all anywhere else in the galaxy, though they could have still featured some imported, genetically engineered clones of Earth animals to populate a few planets and avoid them feeling too barren. Frankly, I think the least believable aspect of Starfield's lore anyway is the suggestion that humans allowed dogs and cats to go extinct. I appreciate that they ran out of food and had to evacuate the planet in the midst of a calamity, but there's just no way that humanity would leave Earth behind without at least a few pets surviving. And even if they hadn't, they certainly would have found some way to preserve pet DNA to clone some animals after settling down in a new solar system. But anyway, having Earth exist as the only known cradle of life before it was eventually destroyed would have been an interesting approach to take. And it wouldn't even be that much of a tonal shift for the game, since as it stands, even with alien life being plentiful, most of the people of the settled systems rarely show even a passing interest in the hundreds of known and undiscovered creatures lurking somewhere out in the galaxy. They are clearly commonplace enough that there's nothing that exciting about aliens to most of the settlers of the settled systems, and I think that's a bit of a shame, especially given how important the search for extraterrestrial life has always been to the pursuit of space travel and intergalactic exploration. Starfield successfully evokes the spirit of curiosity and adventure in stories across the settled systems, and raises many big questions, but it rarely fixates on life beyond humanity. There are, however, a few vague hints at something potentially extraterrestrial in the story. I'm sure that at least a few players were expecting the Starborn to end up being aliens, but the fact that they're human too only reinforces the human focus of this world. And when all is said and done and the credits have rolled, the game leaves you wondering whether there still could be intelligent aliens out there somewhere or not.
And when you get those things, will you be content, or will you suffer, wanting more? Perhaps the key to a healthy life is to treasure what you already have.
Starfield's central mystery, revolving around the artifacts, the temples, the Starborn, and the Unity, is obviously never fully resolved. We don't know with any degree of certainty who built the temples or what the unity represents on the grand cosmic scale. And generally speaking, I think that's a good thing, because the open-ended questions about life, the universe, and everything are fundamental to the game's DNA. I genuinely hope that they never give us any concrete answers, since any reveal of funky squid monsters pulling the strings or subversive twists showing that the real unity was the friends we made along the way would almost certainly be disappointing for most players. And while I'm not convinced that they will actually attempt to properly tie things up with a neat bow in future DLCs, it is certainly possible that an intelligent race of aliens could be the creators of the artifacts. The invention of the grav drive in Starfield's world is arguably the most important event in human history. And that invention was only made possible by the discovery of the first artifact. Grav drive research may have killed the Earth, but it also enabled humanity to become an interstellar species, by making hopping between solar systems as easy for them as walking to their local chunks for a nutritious cuboid lunch. Again, though, it would likely never have been possible if not for that first artifact. An artifact which, when combined with its friends, ultimately allows people to enter the Unity and become starborn. How exactly that works, though, isn't clear. And even less clear is who was responsible for creating those artifacts and building the temples. These mysterious creators are referred to simply as the creators by the Starborn and within the Unity, which is not an especially helpful clue other than ruling out the possibility that a single ethereal entity could be responsible. It's not uncommon in sci-fi stories to describe a higher cosmic power in vague terms to avoid disappointing the audience with an unimpressive depiction of godlike forces. But the specific powers and structures left behind by Starfield's creators do raise some uniquely interesting questions. If these creators built the temples and the artifacts, then presumably at some point they had access not only to the Unity and the power to traverse the multiverse, but also to the powers over reality found within the temples. With all that celestial magic, then, something has to have happened to make these creators disappear and spread the artifacts out across the galaxy. In my eyes, then, it's probably one of two things. Either there was some kind of life-ending catastrophic explosion at the heart of the Unity which sent the pieces of the armillary flying out across the universe, or there was a purposeful effort made by the creators to spread out and hide the artifacts, either to leave a puzzle for future intelligent organisms or to avoid them being reassembled, before the creators themselves disappeared or slowly went extinct. A catastrophic event wiping out an entire intelligent alien species and leaving behind the remnants of their incredible powers and society would certainly make plenty of sense, and would also be a familiar sci-fi answer to the mystery. But I think the other possibility is more interesting. It is strange, though, that in either case there would be no trace of the specific lives of the creators themselves, only their floaty metallic structures. There are no carvings on the walls of monstrous goat people or humanoid snake creatures, so these potential sentient aliens could look, sound, and act like just about anything. I have heard the meta reading before where some people believe the creators might actually be Bethesda themselves, with the game designed to resemble a sort of simulation where they are the true gods. And in fairness, I think this interpretation would make a lot of sense, but nevertheless I choose not to believe in such a theory, mostly because it's essentially equivalent to an "it was all a dream" story twist. This being the case would dramatically devalue the story and the player's individual journey within the game, even if it does kind of work. Either way, I think it would probably make more sense and be more thematically satisfying if instead the Starborn themselves had been involved in the creation of the artifacts somehow. There's no direct controllable Starborn time travel present in Starfield, but it feels believable that, at a point, you could become such a powerful multiverse traversing being that you would be able to time travel, create the artifacts, and complete a loop through time. You can already slow time and to some extent predict the future, so it certainly isn't much of a stretch. And the mere act of entering the Unity itself already catapults you into the past, in a new universe. So again, it seems like a pretty plausible explanation. It could be that after becoming Starborn, humanity can evolve slowly beyond the limits of reality itself, growing powerful enough to, paradoxically, become their own creators. Starfield's answer to the question of is there life out there in the far reaches of the galaxy is at first a pretty disappointing one. Yes, there is life, but it's basically just gangly monsters and angry alien beasties. The more meaningful answer beyond that one, though, is that the lack of intelligent extraterrestrials means that the only life that really matters in answering the big philosophical questions is humanity itself. You can spend as long as you like exploring the galaxy and discovering new things, but finding any real answers may ultimately require looking inward, not outward. But how do you feel about Starfield's unintelligent aliens? Would you have preferred to see some weird humanoid creatures in the game? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more stories and more games. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.